At what stage does history become mythology? How much of the history we teach is an accurate account of events, and how much is traditional lore wrapped in the guise of fact? As historians, we must constantly struggle to separate truth from legend, and the struggle is never an easy one. This is nowhere more evident than in the War of the Artificers. Every school child can recite the basic story. Two brothers, each with phenomenal magical skills, each trained by the great Tokesha, each specializing in the creation of magical devices. Their rivalry grew to immense proportions until an entire continent was plunged into war, and another continent was completely destroyed. This is the legend. But what of the history? I'm back again to tell you the short version of everything you would ever need to know about a card game expansion from 30 years ago. What the fuck am I doing with my life? Antiquities is super interesting for a few different reasons, including introducing some of the most hated and loved lands in the entire game. So let's jump right in. Antiquities is really cool because it is the exact experience it was trying to be. To understand this, you have to remember that in 1994, the internet and communication was not what it is today. There were cell phones, but most people didn't have one, and even if you did, it didn't really have a screen like they do now. Hell, most people didn't really even have internet access at home. So it was really hard to distribute information. And because of this limitation they had at this time, and the limitation that most people would be opening just a few of these packs, they couldn't present a normal narrative, since the story was being delivered via the flavor text and card names, and those came in random packs. So you would get the information in a different order from someone else, and probably wouldn't get all of it. Antiquities is the story of the war between Urza and Mishra. But not right now. This war happened a long time ago, and you, dear Planeswalker, must play an archaeologist and dig through the sands of time to learn what little time has not ravaged. This set is packed with flavor, and the idea that you're an archaeologist or a wizard dealing with archaeologists to scavenge for artifacts of old and whatever history you can is such a cool fucking concept. Especially if your means of distributing that story is through random cards they may or may not see. It's such a fascinating idea, and honestly one that I don't think could capture the same magic today. We've just been so connected to things for so long, and all of this information is available at our fingertips. So the impact and effectiveness of such a unique narrative device is lessened. Oh well, I guess cell phones and access to most of human knowledge is probably worth Antiquities not hitting as hard, but it's close. I won't say much more about the lore here because it's evolved over time as gaps have been filled, but there is a book called The Brothers' War, which in my opinion is actually quite good. It's not the best book I've ever read, but most magic books kind of suck, in my opinion, and when I read The Brothers' War, I actually had trouble putting it down. It's not a difficult or long read either, so it's not like it's a huge time investment, but if you ever have the opportunity, I would give it a shot. Moving right along, Antiquities was the second ever expansion set, released in March of 1994. The set has 85 mechanically unique cards and came in 8 card boosters. Within these 8 card packs, you would get 2 cards off of the uncommon sheet and 6 cards off of the common sheet. These sheets were 11 by 11, or 121 cards each, and if you were paying attention a few seconds ago, you might realize that 85 cards is less than 242, which is 121 because there's 2 sheets. Point I'm failing to make here is that many of these cards appeared on these sheets more than once. This is why if you go on Scryfall, some of these cards will be labeled as rare, because for all intents and purposes, some of them are rare. On the uncommon sheet, cards can appear either once, twice, or 3 times, and cards can appear on the common sheet either once, twice, or 4 times. This means a lot, but one of the things that it means is that a card that only appears on the common sheet once is roughly as common as a card that appears on the uncommon sheet 3 times. So, the C1s appear as often as the more common uncommons, but appear in one of the 6 common slots. And don't get me started on the Tron lands. These 3 lands are called Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower, and when you have one of each out, they collectively tap for 7 mana, which is decent for 3 lands. Anyway, all 3 of these lands have 4 different artworks, and all of these artworks are logically on the sheet somewhere because they exist, and 2 of the Mine and Power Plant and 3 of the Tower appear at C1, and 2 of the Mine, Power Plant, and 1 of the Tower appear at C2. And I'm not smart enough to figure out how rare that makes them relative to everything else, but I can hazard a guess that the answer is not that rare at all. The point is that the rarity and correlation of this set is a little complicated, which I guess makes sense because the game was made by math nerds. So I recently talked about how fun Arabian Nights Limited can be, but I really can't say the same for Antiquities. I've played this against bots, and it's not terrible there. Just grab, like, all of the green cards and the red cards, and don't draft many artifacts, but you can grab, like, Ornithopter and the 1-mana artifacts if you get a couple of Atogs. If you do that, it's almost impossible to lose a draft of this set. Against people, I think it's more complicated because I imagine everyone would also do that, and you'd all be left with like 4-color decks that are running like Strip Mine and Matrix Factory. To make matters worse for limited, but kind of interesting, all of the removal in this set deals with artifacts, except for Orcish Mechanics. And most of it is in red and green. Although blue does have Hurkyl's Recall, but in my experience, these games are so shit and slow, if you are using just them and drafting, Hurkyl's Recall kind of doesn't actually do anything. They just recast all their shit and one of you decks out another 10 turns later. Unless you're like actually trying to run the big artifacts for some reason. I wouldn't do that in a limited of this set because Crumble exists. Either way, this set was not designed for limited, so it is hard to criticize it too much for the limited experience. That might be my new catchphrase. Anyway, I say all this because I love this set. And it was never really intended to be a standalone set. If you insist on drafting this, try to have a carefree attitude and lots of time. I do think this set does pair pretty decently with Arabian Nights, so if you do want to do a cube or some sort of like draft experience of this, I would use both of them, because I think they kind of tie together pretty nicely in unintended ways. But I've never actually done that, so fuck if I know. Going back to the plot, another thing that makes Antiquities super interesting is that every card in the set is either an artifact, has the word artifact in its rules text, or taps for at least 1 colorless mana. In its own way, it's kind of inspiring how hard they went in on this, but it is important to note that this is a set of 85 cards, and there are only 7 cards of each color. That's kind of wild by today's standards, but most of this set is colorless. There's also a lot of interesting cards in this set. Argivian Archaeologist is a card I really like because of how unique and interesting its ability is. To me, it feels like a very white card, and it hits that hard-to-land spot where it feels a little broken, but in practice, it's just okay. It's such a cool card. And shocking probably no one, the blue cards are really interesting in the artifact set. Hurkyl's Recall is very strong depending on the context, but anywhere people are playing a lot of artifacts, this thing is insanely mana efficient. Power artifact combos with Basalt and Grim Monolith to go mana positive, which means it's a 2-card infinite colorless mana maker with at least 2 other cards, and it also does some other cool stuff. In this set, it's pretty decent with Rocket Launcher. It only lowers the activation cost by 1, but this does mean that you get twice as many activations, and in a small card pool, that's actually not bad. Transmute Artifact is really awesome. It's basically fixed Tinker, but it came out before Tinker, which is really funny. In one of his drive to works, Mark says he was just trying to clean up a transmute artifact when he made Tinker, and good job, because by removing most of the cost of this card, he did succeed in making Tinker less complex to read. Really funny stuff. The black cards aren't too great, but they also aren't that bad. Gate to Phyrexia sees some commander play if you have a copy of it. It's one of the few mono black cards that can deal with artifacts, but I wouldn't call this good in 60 card formats. Priest of Yawgmoth has always been a card that I find really fascinating, and Yawgmoth Demon is actually pretty strong, at least at the time. The red cards are also pretty great, with the best ones probably being a Tog and Shatterstorm. But Goblin Artisans is fucking fantastic. Just look at this fucking card. I would not recommend ever playing it, but it's so fucking funny. A Tog is a really strong card in the right circumstances. If you can play Moxen, this dude is an aggro king. But if you are crazy enough to play a limited of this set, having an Atog can really fuck with your opponent's head and make their blocking choices really confusing. You can sacrifice things before damage is dealt, or at least you could. They changed combat recently, and I have no fucking clue what they did since I don't really do tournaments or limited anymore, at least not in public with, where comprehensive rules matter. But at least at the time, and maybe even now, after blockers are declared, you can just sack all your artifacts to a Tog. So, like, as a simplified version of what's going on here, what do you do if you're at 9 life, have 1 blocker, and your opponent is swinging in with an Atog and Colossus of Sardia? You lose. That's what you do. Shatterstorm is like the red Wrath of God, but for artifacts, and while it's definitely more niche than Wrath, because every set cares about creatures to some degree, and that's not the case with artifacts, it is still a powerful card given the right context. The green cards are also really interesting. Crumble is kind of an artifact version of Swords to Plowshare, and therefore is a really efficient removal piece, and it does see some play in mono-green old-school decks. Power Leech is like impossible to overcome if you are doing a limited of this set, so I don't recommend doing that because it's not super fun. So it is a super interesting card, and it also fucks with the Moxen if you are playing with a lot of those for whatever reason. Titania's Song is probably the most interesting green card, and it's a pretty open-ended card. Is this card 0 artifact removal, or is it a way to swing in with your JM Day Tome that's now a 4/4? It can be both. Super cool card. The artifacts are the main point of this set, and there are some interesting ones. Ashnod's Altar came out in this set, and that card has a couple of uses. Bronze Tablet is fucking hilarious. Candelabra of Tawnos is really neat, despite not being all that strong, but you can do some stuff with it. Feldon's Cane is a beloved design. Ivory Tower is really fucking annoying when it's in a control list. Millstone started a whole fucking mechanic. Ornithopter, man, we could talk about Ornithopter for this whole video. Rocket Launcher is an infinite mana payoff or pretty solid removal depending on the context. Tawnos' Coffin lets you do some pretty busted and confusing and convoluted stuff. Triskelion is way better than it looks if you're a more modern player, and Yoshin Soldier is really hard to deal with. And don't even get me started on the lands. Mishra's Factory is incredibly strong and perfectly acceptable as a dex-only win condition. Mishra's Workshop is fucking insane. This thing taps for 3 fucking mana, and the only downside is that you have to play artifacts. Gosh darn it. Strip Mine is arguably one of the strongest lands ever printed, and a card I personally enjoy playing with and against, but not everybody feels that way. And of course the Tron lands. Modern players everywhere used to praise this design space for making their format more diverse and interesting to play. They would see a Tron land and say something like, wow! I actually forget the rest. But the point is that this set is awesome, and the cards are great, and everybody loves them. Seriously, Antiquities did a lot of things right if you consider the context of the time, and a large chunk of these cards are still relevant, which is pretty awesome. It's not what I'd call my favorite set, not by a long shot, but the lore is pretty interesting, and I really appreciate how they leaned into the idea that you're digging up the past for power and knowledge. That's really fucking cool. Anyway, that's all I really have for you today. I wouldn't recommend drafting this set alone for anything other than a laugh. but I do think these cards are pretty cool and interesting, and that Magic is a richer game for this set. Anyway, tell me what you think in the comments, and otherwise you can like the video if you liked it, you can subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Tron.